Hello guys, welcome to another video. And a few days after the launch of 3.23 Affliction League, GGG added a new rare drop to the game in the form of Valdo's Puzzle Boxes. These boxes can be opened to reveal a tier 17 map, which has been created by a supporter via the highest tier of the new core supporter packs. And these maps can be pretty ridiculous depending on what the creator has decided to do with it. They can decide which foiled reward is offered on map completion and which grueling map modifiers the players must overcome in order to obtain the reward. And these rewards can be really good. Foiled Mage Bloods, Headhunters, Nimis, pretty much all of the rarest and most sought after items in Path of Exile can be found in these specific Valdo's Puzzle Box maps. But in order to obtain the reward, the player must overcome the odds which are stacked against them. And some of these map modifiers are just insane. Players have 100% reduced effect of auras, players cannot evade, cannot block, players cannot gain flask charges, players deal 10% less damage per equipped item, monsters can only be damaged within a 2-meter radius, players cannot suppress spell damage, players have 50% reduced movement speed and movement skills are disabled. The list just goes on and on. And these are just the modifiers that make your character weaker. There's also a bunch of mods that just juice up the map itself, like monsters firing 6 additional projectiles or enraging on low life. The map itself contains the entire arsenal of the feared bosses, or the fact that there's only a single map portal so you only have one chance to beat it. But the most notable modifier of all of them on the new Valdo's Puzzle Box maps, that's the one which voids your character if you die. That's right, if you die in the map, your character is gone. Sent to the void, you won't be able to log into the character anymore, you won't be able to retrieve the gear or anything like that, it's gone forever. Now in this video, we're going to be talking about an extremely tanky build that was designed to complete some of the most stacked Valdo's Puzzle Box maps in order to obtain their lucrative rewards. But before we get there, we need to understand the origin story of this character.
Oh, come on! Where's that garbage table?
What you just saw was Captain Lance's character, which he had already used to obtain multiple Mage Bloods from Valdo's maps, dying to the Shaper's Beam and being forever sent to the Void. What you may not have noticed though was the culprit, the cause of all of this misery. No, it wasn't Maven blocking Lance's vision at every turn, it wasn't Atziri storms or even the Shaper Beam itself, no. The cause of all of this suffering was a table, and so the Table Destroyer was born. Let's head over to the POB for this character build. So Lance has chosen a Trickster for this assignment, and this is being used largely for one of the more notable interactions with the new Wildwood Ascendancies, and that's the Trickster's Escape Artist notable, which provides +1 to maximum energy shield per 6 evasion rating on equipped body armor. And combining this node with the Warden's Oath of the Magi, which grants double defenses from equipped body armor, as long as it has no socketed gems. So the evasion and energy shield on this Sadist Garb body armor is being doubled, to provide 5,508 evasion rating and 1,206 energy shield, and then Escape Artist goes to work with these numbers, providing a further 918 maximum energy shield. That's quite frankly ridiculous amounts of stats gained from a single gear piece. And while we're on this topic, the budget for this build? Yes. I was in Captain Lance's stream when he was crafting this body armor, and let me tell you, he was absolutely dedicated to the cause. He rolled over many great body armors in search of absolute perfection, and this can really be seen across most, if not all of the components that make up this build. Now, this build is using Energy Shield both defensively as the main form of life due to the use of Chaos Inoculation, but it's also using it offensively via the Ephemeral Edge unique sword, which grants maximum lightning damage equal to 20% of maximum energy shield. So naturally, intelligence stacking is very beneficial here, and intelligence actually helps a lot to solve some of the issues this build may have had. For example, the accuracy mastery is being taken here, which provides accuracy rating equal to intelligence. And since this build is using Blade Trap for damage, this completely solves hit chance. Meanwhile, you may notice this ridiculous amount of increased evasion rating stat here, almost 500% increased evasion rating, and a lot of this is coming from the evasion and energy shield mastery right here, which provides 1% increased evasion rating per 5 intelligence. The intelligence is also being used to gain 10% less damage taken from the Eldritch implicit on the body armor too. So where's all this intelligence coming from? Well, there's a lot of flat and increased intelligence spread across much of the gear. The shield has 50 flat in and 2 synthesized implicits for a further 20 flat in and 6% increased intelligence. The helm, body armor and boots all have another 55 flat intelligence each. Then there's this crazy moonstone ring here which has 66 intelligence and 19 all attributes, and it has another 24 intelligence and 13% increased intelligence as synth implicits. That's completely absurd, and this one is actually being mirrored using the Calandra's Touch unique ring as well. So this build effectively has 2 of those monstrosities. And speaking of monstrosities, just what on earth is this Simplex amulet? This is providing an effective 45% increased intelligence and 274% increased damage. And it's not over yet. There's a large cluster jewel here, which is granting a ton of energy shield, lightning damage, and, you've guessed it, more intelligence. And also an Emperor's Mastery jewel here for good measure too, because why not? So that's the intelligence stacking, which is a massive part of this setup, but what else is going on here? Lance is using forbidden jewels to obtain the Saboteur's Born in the Shadows notable, which provides blind on hit and a blind aura, and importantly grants 15% reduced damage taken from blinded enemies. Meanwhile, spell suppression is being capped with the help of the Trickster's Spellbreaker notable and the Inveterate Wheel on the passive skill tree. And Lance is stacking modifiers which increases the amount of spell damage prevented. There's 3% on the Inveterate notable and another 3% taken on the spell suppression mastery itself. Then the Trickster's Spellbreaker Ascendancy notable provides an additional 10% of spell damage prevented while on full energy shield. And that which was taken, a new jewel dropped by the King in the Mists, provides a further 6% of this stat. So 56% of spell damage is being prevented all of the time, and a whopping 72% is prevented while on full energy shield. Lance is also stacking maximum lightning resistance combined with melding of the flesh to gain 90% all elemental resistances. 7% is gained from purity of lightning, and then a total of 8% comes from gear, that's 3% on the shield, 2% from the Eldritch implicit on the helmet, and another 3% from the Eldritch implicit on the body armor. Then 1% comes from Unnatural Calm, the notable on the passive skill tree at the top over here. And the last 3% is coming from the Impossible Escape dual setup for Imbalanced Guard. So Solar Steel and Prismatic Skin are being taken down there for the final 3% to reach a total of 90% to each elemental resistance. As mentioned earlier, Chaos Inoculation is being used too, so the build is immune to Chaos damage, and of course the Mage Blood unique belt, which makes all of these flasks have permanent effects. That's the Ruby, Sapphire and Topaz flasks, which are all enchanted for 70% increased effect and rolled for 25% increased effect, and these are all providing 39% less damage taken for each of their respective elemental damage type, all of the time. Also worth noting is the Quicksilver flask, which is granting stun immunity. And what about the recovery? This build has a total of about 10% energy shield regeneration, providing nearly 3,000 energy shield regenerated per second, and this is made up from the energy shield mastery for 2%, then another 2.7% from the That Which Was Taken unique jewel, and the remaining regeneration comes from the Veiled modifier craft on the Sapphire flask combined with the Zealous Oath. But this build isn't only relying on regeneration for its energy shield recovery, because thanks to the Trickster's Spellbreaker notable, 50% of the time when being hit by spell damage, energy shield recharge will begin, providing just over 11,000 energy shield recovered per second, and this recharge won't be stopped by damage either due to the Wicked Ward Keystone, so it can easily reach full energy shield again after taking damage. And the build is obtaining Elemental Ailment immunity. This comes from the Boots modifier and Eldritch implicit, combined with the Ancestral Vision unique jewel. This one's also providing corrupted blood immunity on the corrupted jewel implicit there too. Meanwhile, curse immunity is gained from the Balance of Terror jewel. That's actually quite important considering the build isn't excessively overcapped on resistances. And Lance is also taking Heartstopper on the Trickster Ascendancy. Whilst this is not a very reliable form of defense, it will provide a considerable amount of mitigation over the course of an encounter against, for example, the Feared in a Valdo's Puzzle Box map. And one step ahead is also spec'd into here. This one is nice defensively too, especially against Ghosted Feared to help slow them down a little bit. And importantly, this also allows the build to run Petrify on hit maps, which is a modifier that can appear on Valdo's Puzzle Box maps. And really, that just leaves physical damage unaccounted for. How is this build dealing with physical damage? Well, in truth, physical damage is this build's biggest weakness, but realistically, it's not much of a weakness. More on that in a moment. Lance is squeezing in as much physical damage taken as other damage types as possible. The helmet is providing 10% of physical damage from hits taken as chaos damage. This is a delve modifier, and a further 8% of this stat comes from an eldritch implicit there too. And another 10% of this stat comes from the armor and energy shield mastery all the way over here on the left of the passive tree. And due to chaos inoculation, this means that 28% of physical damage taken from hits is removed from the calculation, so this build essentially takes 28% less damage from physical hits. There's also 10% of physical damage from hits taken as lightning damage on a Watcher's Eye jewel here, and the mastery for 10% less physical damage taken while on full energy shield is also being taken. The Born in the Shadows notable, and the less damage taken from intelligence stacking that we discussed earlier also help out massively with physical damage too, along with Heartstopper if the timing is right. But let's put this into perspective a little bit. Let's take a worst case scenario in the context of the content that's being run on this build. And that's likely a Shaper Slam for a few reasons. Firstly, it's an attack, so spell suppression does nothing here, and it's also a pure physical damage ability. Let's say the character is not on full energy shield, and Heartstopper's less damage taken for hits is currently inactive. Also, let's say the Shaper is ghosted with Cutthroat's Grip for 18% increased global physical damage, and high rolls the Slam ability for maximum damage. And, well, let's just say the Shaper has 9 Frenzy charges as well for 36% more damage, for science. So the Shaper's Slam ability in this case would deal about 24,446 damage. So 6,845 damage is taken as Chaos, and since this build is immune to Chaos damage, this portion is removed from the equation. 2,445 damage is taken as Lightning, and the remaining 15,156 damage is taken as physical. Firstly, resistance is applied, bringing the lightning damage portion down to 245 damage. Then, the 15% reduced damage taken from Born in the Shadows comes into play. Then 10% less damage taken from the intelligence stacking Eldritch Implicit on the body armor goes to work. And lastly, the Topaz Flask further reduces the portion of lightning damage being taken. So a total of 11,709 damage is taken from an originating hit of 24,446 physical damage. This would be reduced massively down to only 6,328 damage if Heartstopper's hit reduction was active and Energy Shield was full when the slam was taken. And so, whilst the build does potentially take a lot of damage from something like a Shaper Slam, physical damage is not really a problem, mainly due to the massive energy shield pool and recovery that it has, and the fact that realistically, there's just not that many really dangerous physical abilities that may be encountered in these Valdo's maps. The Shaper Slam is probably the most dangerous, or possibly something combining Ulna Toll from the Hidden with some other map modifiers. But most of the dangerous things that will be encountered are elemental damage, and a lot of them are spells too. So let's take a look at one of the big ones, Atziri's Flameblast. And once again, we'll run a worst case scenario. Energy Shield is not full, Heartstopper's hit reduction is not active, and let's say that Atziri isn't blinded or in the range of the Born in the Shadows aura. And Atziri's not poisoned either, so of course the Flameblast is a max roll and it crits too. And surely Atziri has 9 frenzy charges. Oh, and did I mention it's a double Flameblast too? So this ends up being a total hit of a whopping 267,644 fire damage with 10% fire penetration. Resistance goes to work first, and with 10% penetration, this reduces the damage by 80%, bringing it down to 53,528. Then, the 10% less damage taken from the intelligence stacking body armor implicit brings the damage down to 48,175. Then, 39% less damage taken from the ruby flask, reducing it to 29,387. And lastly, since it's a spell suppression is applied for a further 56% less damage taken, for a total of 12,930 fire damage taken after all mitigation. Obviously, this is a worst case scenario, and realistically, this build takes much less damage from an Atziri double Flameblast. For example, if Atziri was blinded and poisoned, and didn't have 9 frenzy charges, the damage taken would be reduced to 6,216. And if Energy Shield was also full and Heartstopper's hit reduction was active, this would go all the way down to 2,373 damage taken from an originating hit of over 150,000 fire damage. That's incredible defenses at work. And really, this build is quite the work of art that Captain Lance has put together here for the purpose of farming some of the most dangerous content the game has to offer. It's still going to have to avoid some of the ridiculous map modifier combinations that the Valdo's Puzzle Box maps may have to offer, such as a combination of 100% reduced aura effect and players cannot suppress spell damage. But this build will and has actively been tackling some absolutely monstrous maps so far, and I look forward to seeing what more it can do, and also what builds others may come up with to beat these maps as well. And that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of the defenses of Captain Lance's Valdo's Puzzle Box farming build, and perhaps you've been trying your hand at farming these new tier 17 maps. Let me know how you're getting on by commenting below. If you liked this video, let the algorithm know by clicking the thumbs up button and subscribe for more content like this in the future. And of course, if you want to support me and the growth of this channel, you can become a channel member just like these guys by clicking the join button below. Thank you for all your continued support, it's very much appreciated. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.